All right. Kylie, it's about 4 after. I think we can probably jump in on this Friday afternoon. Thank God we made it to Friday.
Yeah, right. So today we're here to give you the tea about this contract, or really what's going on in MAPS government contracting, to make sure you slay instead of sweat. So don't yeet your submission out the window. Don't get cooked by this. No cap. We're going to help you maybe not actually build a submission, but here we are. We'll make it skibbity compelling. If you have no idea what I said, we're here to give you some updates so that you don't struggle on this or any other real opportunity, and kind of redirect your team towards what may be a better opportunity for you, kind of based on our impressions of what's going on in the world of MAPS. So let's navigate Army's $50 billion MAPS contract and some more.
I just want to let people know that we showed a lot of restraint because I'm a former navigator, and the number of like navigation related puns I could have made that I did not in building this presentation, just want to put it out there that you're welcome. We've spared you from many of my bad jokes. Not all of them, though.
Your two swoes leading you on this really are disappointing by the lack of navigation.
Yeah.
So today we're going to go through introductions, both about us and about Trident, and a little bit of an opportunity overview of what we know and kind of what we're thinking is going on with this contract. We'll look at what the draft looks like right now and kind of the areas that you want to watch as this unfolds, and then what your next steps will be. You can ask questions via chat the entire time, and be sure to keep a lookout for those banners at the very bottom. We try to put key takeaways there for you. Okay. Let's get going. Cool. Our presenters are me. I'm Kylie Stewart. I'm a capture and proposal manager, and I've been with Trident for 6 years, which is crazy to me. I'll be the first person that you get to talk to when you reach out to Trident, because I'll handle all new client sales. I also did the voice of Trident shorts way back when. Those are still online, and you can meditate with them if you'd like. Naval Academy grad, Navy veteran, and a Navy spouse. And I'm joined by Rebecca Wayland, who's our GWAC and MAC lead, and our chief of staff extraordinaire. She wrote FastProp.
Co-wrote.
Okay.
I gotta give props to Julie, my co-author.
Okay, fair, fine. She has 10 years of proposal experience and is our core brain trust. She's also a Naval Academy grad, a Navy veteran, and a Navy spouse. You can email us at any time at this web address, or this email address, webinars@tridentproposals.com, if you have questions about anything we've talked about today that we don't address or that you don't drop into the Q&A. So feel free to reach out to us. Cool. About Trident Proposal Management. We are a full lifecycle bid support company. So we do everything from business development, capture management, proposal support and management, training and advisory services. And our goal is to meet you where you're at and to support you and your team where you need. We're geographically dispersed, so we have 24/7 proposal support, and we can flex in and provide elastic support to your team while keeping the high quality that you expect when you're developing your proposal. 80% of our clients are repeat customers, and that's something that we're really proud to say. We also have a rating of 4.96 out of 5 stars. And we want to help you have confidence in your bid. So we deliver over 100 competitive compliant proposals annually. And we've helped customers secure $5 billion, or I guess over $5 billion in government contracts during our time. Cool. So you're in the right place if you are in business development or you're a proposal management manager who knows that the government contract landscaping is really changing right now. If you want to be proactive in face of that change, and if you're looking for ways to maximize your contracting potential. This webinar is not for anybody who likes the thrill of being completely unprepared. And it's not for anybody if you want to put things off until the last minute so that they only take a minute to do. So I'll see myself out. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. But I'll turn it over to you, Rebecca, for opportunity overview.
Awesome. Thanks, Kylie. So everybody here wants to hear about MAPS, right? And we want to give you a couple anchor points just for some background information in case you're not tracking. So MAPS is the marketplace for acquisition of professional services, which is a little bit of a mouthful. And here's what you need to know about this. This is actually designed to be or intended to be a consolidation of two other contract vehicles that exist under the Army. So that Information Technology Enterprise Solutions 3 services, the next iteration of that, and then the responsive strategic sourcing for services, more commonly known as RS3. MAPS was supposed to be the consolidation of those two things. So combining IT, professional services, as well as other professional services under this one umbrella is what the Army was trying to accomplish here. So if this comes to fruition, we'll talk more about that in a minute. It was supposed to have about a $50 billion ceiling. So this is a pretty large multiple award IDIQ. Pretty standard 10-year period of performance. Obviously, these two, ITES 3S and RS3, are ending in 2027. So they were Army was trying to get ahead of things, look down the road and say, all right, what's taking its place? And then just in terms of how they were going to run the contract, they would expect on-ramping, off-ramping, right, to keep the contractor pool fresh, make sure they're getting the latest technology. That's something that we see very commonly with professional services and IT contracts. Just wanting to make sure that you've got the right small businesses in place, the right large businesses, and that you're getting the evolving technology and the innovations as they're developed. And then what was really appealing, I think, for a lot of people about MAPS is that it's leaning towards a self-scoring format with gate criteria and strict compliance. And we can talk more about why that's really advantageous if you are a bidder, and also if you're the government, right? So if you're having to evaluate a whole bunch of proposals, sometimes if you're just aiming for a score, or if you have these gate criteria, they're very clear compliance, you comply or you don't. If it's very strict criteria that can weed out a lot of your bidders kind of early on, then obviously you get fewer proposals to evaluate. So if you're here today because you're just trying to stay up to speed, that's great. Even if you weren't planning on pursuing MAPS, or even if MAPS doesn't come out, I think we've got some good tips for you in terms of things you can actually do now that are constructive so that it's not just the wait and see game. So with that, Kylie, if we can move to the next slide, please. All right, so this was the big news this week, right? And we have this internal joke at Trident that if we schedule a webinar, it's going to drive some change. And I can't tell you how many times with OASIS Plus and NASA Soup, we'd put something on our calendar and say, all right, we're going to talk. And then 24 to 48 hours before the webinar, an amendment would come out or something would change. So sure enough, our record holds. And on Wednesday, we got this update that the Army is reviewing MAPS to figure out what it wants to do. In light of the executive order, the particular executive order to eliminate waste and save taxpayer dollars by consolidating procurement. And they're just looking to see if there's going to have a potential impact on MAPS as a contract vehicle. So obviously they don't want to spend all of the time and resources to try to put a solicitation out that gets protested to death or canceled or killed after everybody's using resources to try and get it off the ground. So they have taken this reflective delay. So we are not going to see a draft RFP as that was supposed to be out this week. And that was why we picked this week for our webinar. That's okay. So we're not going to see that probably anytime soon. And then there was going to be an accompanying industry day to address questions from this last draft RFP. And they basically pushed all of these things out while they take this reflective delay and really try to get it right. So we can move to the next slide. I want to talk through a couple of highlights of the executive order because there's been a lot of activity, right? A lot of things to keep track of. And it may not be readily apparent why that EO would affect an Army contract vehicle. So I just think it's worth taking a few minutes. So the language that I think really sticks out from the EO is that it required that the domestic, and I put that in bold for a reason, procurement of common goods and services be centralized within the GSA, which is tasked with conducting these procurement activities for all federal agencies. The centralization aims to streamline procurement processes and reduce redundancy. Sounds great, right? And this is actually an effort that's been going on for about the last decade, right? The category management, or this idea of consolidating vehicles, consolidating services so that if the government buys something, they're getting it consistently at a consistent price with a consistent standard. That's something that is an underlying tenet of how to build efficiency into government contracting. Where it gets a little different from what we've seen in the past is that this chart, this is what had been drafted up back in 2019. And you can see that there's 10 different categories, and each one has a different agency lead. So GSA already had kind of responsibility for a lot of these, but then there were the one-offs, right? So medical was going to go under DoD and the VA. Transportation and logistics was a DoD thing. And so with this EO, what they're talking about is moving all 10 of these categories under GSA. It's not a foregone conclusion that this is going to happen, but that's kind of at the heart of this. As they said, you need to look at how you would do this if, is this executable, basically, right? And so I've highlighted in little yellow boxes some of the services that MAPS was supposed to cover. And so with the management and advisory, the research and development, the technical and engineering services, and then the IT support of various flavors. Those were all things that were originally going to be covered by MAPS. So this is why the Army is pausing right now, because we've gotten direction to say, all right, GSA, figure out how you're going to consolidate all these things. And that Venn diagram with what MAPS was going to offer is, it's a circle. So if you want more information about this, Holland and Knight actually put together a really great blog that kind of outlines, steps through like what the implications of this EO are. And we're citing them as a source here. So really appreciate their summation. And we're just giving you the high level wave tops. But if you want to learn more, they're a great resource. They have a wonderful government contracting blog. Highly recommend subscribing to that, as well as subscribing to our inputs for your specific opportunities of interest. Next slide, please. So a couple things to keep in mind, because everybody, I'm sure, had an initial reaction to like the delay and to the EO and to things that are happening right now. So we just want to keep people focused on the end goal, right? Like, so MAPS was already supposed to be this move towards consolidation and efficiency. So this is not necessarily bad news here, right? Like, we were already going to see the sunsetting of some other vehicles, the creation of something new. So no matter what, things were going to move. The other thing to kind of keep in mind about this is that in that EO, it's not all encompassing in terms of its definitions and clarity around the scope of what it's actually going to influence. So for example, there's no current exemption in that executive order for DoD mission needs, which have historically been excluded, right? So DoD, Department of Homeland Security, they tend to get a little bit of a special operating avenue when it comes to things because they do have a different mission set. Their requirements are often more complex than what can be just easily consolidated for things. And, kind of complementary to that, we also do know that rapid technology acquisition is a priority of the administration, right? We've seen the emphasis lately on the software acquisition pathway actually being used, the OTAs, the commercial solutions offerings, right? Those non-traditional avenues, seeing some focus on those. So we're not really sure how that's going to affect what they were trying to do with MAPS. There's also no definition of domestic in that executive order. And so whether it was an oversight or whether it was intentionally vague, we don't know, but it's going to have, anytime you talk about the DoD and the global operations that are touched by the DoD, the meaning of domestic matters a lot, right? So that's an area to watch. And then just some other factors at play, right? If we are trying to read the tea leaves, it's really difficult to do. And I don't think anybody has a crystal ball that can tell you with certainty, here's absolutely what's going to happen. So we are just talking today about things that could happen, right? So that you can, again, prepare as constructively as possible without wasting resources. So some things that we're watching as it relates to government contracting as a whole, I would say, absolutely this EO guidance and changes to it that, dictating to consolidate the procurement under GSA. We know that there's some revisions to the FAR underway, and I think that's going to get a big vote in how things are competed, how things are protested, right? Like, which is kind of where the input from industry comes in addition to just the engagement with the contracting officers and things like that. So industry is absolutely going to get some kind of a vote. The agency capability and capacity, right? Like GSA has to actually be able to execute. If they do indeed become the sort of governing authority for all of these 10 categories, they've got to have the infrastructure in place to actually execute that successfully. And so we may see a phased consolidation. We may see a rapid expansion of GSA. We may see something in between those. Or there may be some things where they say, no, it really doesn't make sense for GSA to do this. And they come up with a business case for keeping some of those categories separate. And then the mission needs, right? Like there are people deployed today. There are Army people doing Army things. There are Navy people doing Navy things who need continued support, and they have avenues to get them. So the mission always gets a vote, right? And there will be ways to procure things. We just don't know what that's going to be and how that mission is going to change. But that's obviously going to drive what we actually need to do on the contracting side, and probably going to inform how they do the acquisition reform from the top down. So it's hard to look in 5 different directions at once, which is why we have resources like Holland and Knight. You have resources like us, and we're constantly trying to triangulate, to use a navigational term, to just get a fix on where we're at, and just recognize that any big change in any one of these sort of fields can have a domino effect on other ones. So if we can move to the next slide.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm going to do, I think, maybe the first, oops, sorry. Actually, Kyle, I'm going to let you do the next 2 slides, and then I'll take it over around the domains.
Okay, cool. So as we're going through what the draft RFP looks like right now, we've put little magnifying glasses next to requirements to help you kind of keep an eye out, because we think these are going to be the things that may change in the final RFP, or that may be valid enough in other opportunities that they may be worth keeping an eye on and looking out for. So let's dig in. We're that red dot, and we were supposed to get the solicitation released, but yeah, that's not going to happen. And so that May 2025 due date isn't going to happen, and neither is that September, November award. This could look anywhere from it being delayed a month while they try to figure things out, or it not happening at all. So truly the timeline is no longer valid, I don't think. Here's kind of just the general overview. Again, this is a contract to provide knowledge-based support services and support Army enterprise infrastructure and infrastructure goals with IT services. They listed it initially as 541715 as the NICS code associated with this, but they've been in all of their industry days very clear that they're very not sure about that NICS code and are looking for a lot of feedback on what the most appropriate NICS code is. Again, that May 28, 2025 due date is probably not going to happen, but this is a big period of performance because it's replacing both that IDIS 3S and RS3. And so after those 2 are done in 2027, this would cover 10 years with that 5-year base plus a 1 year or 1 5-year operational ordering period. Again, this is falling under that U.S. Army PEO office, but it's supporting Department of Defense and other federal agencies. Because of that, that's probably, and because of those 10 categories Rebecca was talking about, this is probably why we may see this contract shift out from under that customer agency. Again, this is strict compliance. So there's an initial gate that you have to pass, and then you scorecard for the second gate. And you have to get both of those things totally right or at a certain level of your score in order to proceed. They did expect to on and off ramp contracts for this one. So it was going to be something that you could hop on and hop off of, which made it a really good opportunity. If you didn't necessarily have the requirements now or the past performance now, it could have become something that people could get onto later on and serve on. So there was a lot of room for tons of task order opportunities. But the thing that their team really kind of hit the deck about was that you had to participate in this, in the task order competition. So your company had to bid on a certain number of TOs in order to remain on the contract. And so this is something we haven't seen. I mean, I think we've seen it a couple of times, but they really wanted to encourage competition at the task order level. And so they were really taking that participation requirement rather seriously and trying to really set this contract up to make sure that things are being competitive at the task order level.
Yeah,
and then I'll pass it back to you for domains.
Yeah, for sure. And this idea of these participation requirements actually getting enforced might be the slight change that we're seeing now, right? So that's the big news coming out of the GSA multiple award schedule this week, is that they're basically saying, look, we're spending millions in administrative costs to manage contracts that people don't use. Like, you either need to start using them or you need to get off. Every GWAC that we have seen, every GWAC multiple award IDIQ rather that we have seen come out in the last 3 years has had some form of participation requirement, whether that's minimum contracting sales, whether that's the number of bids you need to participate in. I know that was a huge point of contention with RS3, was that they would put things out on the contract vehicle and nobody would bid on them. And industry had their reasons, right? Like, if you talk to people who were on the vehicle and passing on bids, they might have feedback about the rates or the services and what was being expected based on services delivered versus the price the government wanted to pay for it. So there's a little bit of, push and pull there. But yeah, this is absolutely something that I don't see going away, is this idea that no, if you have a vehicle, you're expected to use it and participate. And if you don't, thank you so much for your time. Please move along. Okay, so coming back to this idea of what we're really trying to get you to do is understand what MAPS was designed to do and the services it was supposed to encompass, so that we can read the tea leaves as best we can about where this work might go if it's not on MAPS. There is a chance that this still comes out, not on time, but that it still comes out and comes to fruition. So if it does, I want you to know these five domains again that it's supposed to be supporting are those technical services, the management advisory domain, the RDT&E domain, emerging IT services, and foundational IT services. And they were going to have all the packages submitted via the CHESS portal. So we'll see. I do think there's a larger conversation too that we need to, or the industry and the government contracting shops need to figure out around what's happening to the CHESS program office, because they are a directed acquisition, or they have directed acquisitions for certain things within the Army, for example, right? And the Navy has similar contracts. So and again, one of those factors we're keeping an eye on, right, is what about all these little institutions that exist and are designated authorities or designated avenues for certain procurements? TBD. Next slide, please, Kylie. So this is not a bait and switch, but I do just want to bring up for consideration those domains that we just talked about, right? The technical and engineering, the research and development, the management and advisory, those already exist on a GSA administered contract called OASIS Plus, that in a lot of ways is very similar to MAPS, at least from a proposal standpoint, right? So if you are an OASIS Plus contract holder already, great. We could see a lot of business being driven there. If you're not, there's supposed to be an on-ramping planned for sometime this year. It was going to be the summer. I don't know that they're on track. I haven't heard anything lately. They may be kind of taking a strategic pause as well, just to see where the dust settles on a few things. But just again, for consideration, a lot of what was required in the MAP solicitation was based on previous project experience, right? And having qualifying experience of a certain variety. It's very similar to OASIS Plus. What's great about OASIS Plus is that from an evaluation standpoint, it was also a scorecard, but it had a minimum qualifying threshold. So if MAPS doesn't come true, if this is not something that's achievable, OASIS is a government-wide contract as well, and your Army customers or your other DoD customers, your federal customers all have access to use this, and it's already in existence. And then there's a larger benefit, I think, if you're a small business, because they do have so many small business tracks. So there's different domains, again, largely overlapping with MAPS, at least the RS3 portions of it. And this might be a viable option. So we actually do have an upcoming webinar all around prepping for an OASIS Plus on-ramp. What you will notice is not included in a domain is anything IT related. OASIS Plus is by design deliberately not an IT services contract. Asterisks. There are some IT services that are going to get rolled into OASIS Plus, or that are offered as part of that, if they're considered ancillary to services that you're providing on another domain. So there's a whole paragraph here about, like, here's what would count, here's what wouldn't, here's an example. So I don't think they're going to expand OASIS Plus with an IT category, because GSA has other avenues that exist for that, right? They're doing the Alliant 3, which is a GWAC for IT acquisition professional services. That competition is underway right now. I think they just extended it again until the due date until April. Polaris, I really hope that little guy gets off the ground someday because we've spent so much time and effort. So, I really want to see Polaris come out. We'll see if all the protests can get cleared. I know they're still doing evaluations of the set-aside pools. But again, expect some on-ramps there, right? And if that's not an option, there's always the GSA multiple award schedule. So I will just pause here and remind everybody that no matter what contract vehicle you're pursuing, the thrill of the chase is really exciting. We love a contract award as much as the next team. But if you're not doing some of the legwork up front to make sure that you're picking the right vehicle and you're not investing in how to make this vehicle work for you, it's going to be really difficult to drive business to it and win task orders. So for example, if I may be telling you things you already know, but on the GSA OASIS Plus contract, they spend a lot of time describing the contract administration requirements, right? You have to have designated people who are focused on this contract, who are participating in seminars twice a year and going to the training. And you have to market yourself to your customers because GSA puts the contract vehicle in place, but then it's kind of up to you. You kind of have a co-responsibility with GSA and federal agencies to get smart about how to use this contract and how to drive business here. So I just say that as a way of reminding you that it's not win a contract, print money. Like those are not the two steps. It is prepare to win a contract, talk to your client base, educate them, see if this is something they're familiar with, see if the work that you do aligns to this contract vehicle, make sure you can make use of it. And then, win the contract and then bid on task orders and have competitive prices and right. So it's a straightforward process, but I wouldn't call it a simple process. So just want to remind people that, again, always good to kind of calibrate and understand what your true business development goals are before you start throwing resources behind any of these. Because again, very easy to tell if you can qualify for this, but just because you qualify for it doesn't mean you need it. So, okay, Kylie, I think that was the end of my OASIS stuff. Yeah.
Sweet. So let's talk about MAPS as it exists right now. There are 4 attachments plus a small business subcontracting plan. So you'll do the traditional cover letter. You'll fill out a gate criteria form, whether you're a small business or a large business, and you'll provide your volume 1, which is your systems, agreements, and certifications, and volume 2, which is where all your past performance lives. Your gate criteria includes active security facility clearance, certifications, and CPARS ratings. At the large business level, you have to show that you have an approved accounting system or an approved property management system. All of these things in MAPS are pass and fail, and we see this across a lot of scorecards. You hit the first gate and you're either in or you're out, or you hit some sort of minimum and you're in or you're out. You either have the certifications or you don't. Let's go on to the next one. So some of the things that we want to highlight, whether it's MAPS or not, are the things that show up repeatedly across all of these scorecards. So active security or active secret facility clearance, especially for IT services, having evidence of you working with your facility clearance or even working in ATOs has come up quite a lot in the IT community. And these certifications, both CMMC level 2 or higher, and your ISO certs. In this case, 9001, 2015, but we've seen some other scorecards that have different ISO certs. So all of these things keep coming up. They keep showing up in a wide variety of scorecard bids. And so if you're sitting here looking at MAPS as a potential opportunity, and these things are things that repeatedly eliminate you from opportunities like this or any other of the GWACs or MAIDIQs, these are the things you can start kind of working towards now to help build that portfolio so that when other GWACs or other IDIQs come out, you can compete for them. Otherwise, though, they're looking at your CPARs in an effort to make sure that the quality of the work that you're providing in your past performance is to the standard that they want. And so that's one of the cool things about a scorecard right now is that they can take both kind of an objective measurement of your past performance and a subjective measurement by using your CPARs and your evaluations to help kind of make sure that your quality is there. I'm gonna have to pull up the RFP for that one. Rebecca, do you see the question in the chat?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. It does describe it in there, if I remember right.
It does. And by the way, that's also an area that we flagged to watch for what it's worth. Because we can stop for a second and talk a little bit about the CPARs. Because there's kind of, I think what was most interesting to me about this solicitation, and we actually provided feedback on this, was this idea that as part of the gate criteria, they were also going to pull kind of your aggregate CPARs rating for even contracts that you weren't submitting, right? So basically looking at your company's performance record across everything in a relatable NICS code and seeing like, hey, did you just have 3 golden shining examples, but everything else is pretty mediocre, or do you consistently perform well for all of your clients? So that's what you see here on this slide, is that NICS code average for the last 3 days, and making sure that, you know, in totality, you don't have ratings that are below that 30%. I think what you're talking about in that question is under the past performance evaluation or for performance quality, where you were going to get 1 point for satisfactory, 3 points for very good, and 5 points for exceptional. Yeah, and so they, again, kind of TBD on that, because I think it also wasn't clear if it was going in the aggregate or if you were like how many of them had to be above. So that scorecard, we expected to see changes or at least clarifications to that. Yeah, so because I'm also seeing some slightly different numbers on the scorecard that I don't see 7, 1, 1, 4, and 7. So I think TBD. But there's always a lot of discussion around that, because yeah, there are things like, yeah, and it might just be, I think it's 1, 3, and 5, at least in the latest version, because that scorecard has undergone revisions too. So it's, people always push back on the satisfactory, or the other thing that they push back on is the categories that count, right? Because there are a lot of contracting officers who, for regulatory compliance, you cannot be outstanding. You are compliant or you are not, right? Like, so that's, you're never going to get more than a satisfactory. So those are all things to keep in mind as the drafts are released and as they're asking for feedback, is to just say, hey, for consideration, Army or GSA or whoever you're dealing with, we would recommend taking these things into account, and then, you know, working anecdotally to show them the impact or the penalty that would be applied for a company that is otherwise outstanding, perhaps inadvertently by having an overly stringent requirement in those categories. So I know it's not a very direct answer to what you're asking, but it's largely because that was a area to watch, because there is a lot of ambiguity in it. Okay, Kyle. Oh,
no. What to do? So you can start off right away in the same way that you would start off if MAPS was going down the path that we all expected, and that's gathering your project records and documentations. We have a free download for this specific to MAPS, but we also have, and I'll do the bait and switch. We also have OASIS Plus free downloads that you may want to use to compile your projects. We love to work with a project tracker because it helps you really down select your projects quickly, but not lose your documentation. So as you build out all of the projects that may be a good fit for this, you can shift them and move them much easier, so that when things change on the contract, you can easily just re-rack and restack. And if something changes back, you can pull projects back up into it. So we always recommend building your compliant or building a project tracker to work from as you're preparing for these things.
And by the way, those changes always happen. We saw a delay with Polaris. We saw a pause with OASIS Plus. With NASA SOUP, we saw extension after extension. And there were amendments in all of those that either clarified whether the recency was based off of the starting date, or sorry, the submission date of the proposal, which was a moving target, or if it was going to be calibrated towards the RFP release date, which if you're 18 months now past that, like there's implications for all of your projects. So Kylie's advice here is spot on, is to, step one is to just really get your head around what all your projects are, what your documentation says, and what the flexibility is that's built into your existing portfolio, so that as the criteria move, how you can redo your little project Jenga to make sure that you're covering as many points as possible.
And it's helpful to do it in Excel because you can put little comments in there and you can flag things that may be close to falling off of recency. And it makes it a little bit easier to navigate, kind of keeping your things organized. The other thing we recommend is that get those industry certifications and meet those standards. Things like CMMC, they're not going away. Things like the ISO certifications are not going away. We see them, and we see them more and more often in these scorecards. And so if everything is being paused and your business development team is kind of open to things, it's a great time to start pursuing those and making sure that you can start meeting those gate criteria. And then again, the same thing that we kind of talked about with OASIS Plus is that it's your responsibility as a business to engage with the customers who need, who you think you want to do business with, or who can validate that past performance reference and make sure that you have the documentation that you need in order to submit these contracts, or that they're aware that you're going to pursue something this large, so that you don't get held up in paperwork drills as you get closer to submitting. We love to help you with your bid and no bid decisions as you're pursuing these GWACs and as you're looking at your eligibility. Most of our large MAIDIQ support packages begin with that eligibility check, where we really validate that score and make sure that your interpretation and our interpretation and the government's interpretation all meet and match. And we want to act as like your worst enemy, I guess, early, the villain.
Your most honest grader.
Your most honest grader, to help reduce your risk and to help save you money so that you're not pursuing something that doesn't actually work for your team.
And by the way, if you work with Trident for an eligibility check, this isn't something where you pay the money and we send you a spreadsheet and then you send it back to us and we say, yeah, that score looks good. Like, no, we're actually looking at your project documentation. When you encounter issues, like if we discover that the project wasn't the value that you thought it was because it's just not what the documentation says, or that it doesn't cover the scope of things, like we give you recommendations on how to go address those gaps. But we'll be very honest if we think that your score is not something that's competitive, or if it's going to be a long road to get you to qualify. We don't abandon you either, right? So we're going to tell you, like, all right, so here's where you're at today. Here's what you need to do to get to an eligible bid. And here's some recommendations on how to make that happen, right? Whether it's looking for specific kinds of projects, looking for teammates that can, fill the portfolio hole. It really depends on the contract. But I think that's one of the things that's unique about Trident's eligibility checks, is that it's not just you turn it over and we turn it back and say yes or no. Like, it's a conversation, and it's something where we really try to understand what leeway you have, and get creative within the bounds of the requirements about other options that you might not have considered. So just want to plant the seed there.
I love the question in the chat, the thoughts on using a larger program that's slightly older to sacrifice recency. And this is why I really like scorecard and GWACs, and everybody on the team rolls their eyes at me, because it really is Tetris, and you really like using that project tracker. You can make those decisions about, should I use a larger program? Should I sacrifice the recency point? You can make those decisions a lot faster and a lot better. For things like OASIS, you could do that. For MAPS, the recency was a requirement, and so you can't sacrifice recency because that project wouldn't be valid as a work sample. Or as a,
and then there's other things to consider with that too, because the project laydown might have had other elements that were also, how do I want to say this, may have had a disproportionate effect, right? So like, how was the retention on that contract is another question I would ask. Like, did you, versus one contract versus another. So to Kylie's point, that's absolutely the benefit of getting everything sort of written down, consolidated, and then you can evaluate things in the context of different combinations. And that's something that we absolutely supported our clients with on both Polaris and OASIS Plus, because as things would change or as contracts became too old or as a requirement got clarified in terms of the documentation, you need to substantiate it. We'd say, all right, well, we have these projects that kind of look the same, except, maybe the NICS code is different. And so are we getting different points and different profiles by aligning things slightly differently? So that's the benefit of getting that neutral sort of third party look, is that we're not coming to it with any preconceived ideas about how things ought to be as part of your proposal. It's really just taking a look at what you have and where you need to be and working from there. And Kylie, I love the other point that you made about those industry certifications, especially the ISO and the CMMC, because we're also not seeing a lot of difference between small businesses and large businesses and these requirements. At best, if you're a small business, you might be permitted to have an in-progress certification. But then there's always that caveat of, but it must be in place within X number of months of contract award. So I think you're absolutely right that these are not things that are going away, and that it's going to be, the standard is the standard for everyone, right? Eventually. So if you haven't made preps for these ISO certifications or for the CMMC, sometimes CMMI comes into play just depending on the services that you offer. Absolutely the financial and business systems, because that's going to allow you to compete on different kinds of task orders. And again, I know it doesn't make sense for everybody. So we're not saying that if you're going to be a government contractor, then, no kidding, you have to have these 5 things no matter what. Like, it's not the case. But to be competitive when you're up against thousands of other bidders, it doesn't hurt.
So we have a couple of resources. Obviously, we'll keep the blog up to date and current depending on where MAPS goes. And we have the associated MAPS downloads. Those are all available on that tridentproposals.com/army-maps. And that's our project tracker for them. But we also have our bait and switch webinar, which is preparing for the GSA OASIS Plus on-ramp, because we really do think that this is a great opportunity for you if you were considering MAPS. We do think that a lot of things will sweep under there. You guys are special in that you're the first to know about this webinar. So if you register now, you get to be the first ones who register. I don't have any free friends. You get my love and affection.
Conversation about how we were like, what's the prize? What's the actual prize? Yeah.
The actual prize is you get to see Rebecca talk again, which is a prize for sure. And we'll talk about OASIS Plus and kind of how to set yourself up for success there. And I think that's it. If you want more information from us, here are all of our socials and our websites that you can follow that we keep pretty up to date. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us at marketing@tridentproposals.com or webinars@tridentproposals.com if you have an opportunity that you're interested in. We do support companies outside of GWACs and IDIQs and these major contract vehicles. So if you do have a solicitation that you need help with, whether it's a compliance check, a tech edit, that eligibility check, we can help you in those bids and no bid decisions. We'd love to talk to you. So please reach out.